Through the base commissary's fluorescent glare, Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes moved quietly, her worn uniform drawing contemptuous glances from young officers who never learned to look beyond appearances. When Lieutenant Langston publicly mocked the elderly black woman, calling her uniform thrift store cosplay, he couldn't have known he was disrespecting a decorated combat veteran whose heroism in Cambodia had been deliberately erased from military records. He couldn't have imagined that the unit patch on her shoulder would catch Brigadier General Sandoval's eye, triggering an investigation that would unearth buried truths about Operation Iron Veil, a classified mission where Evelyn had saved countless lives only to be denied recognition because of politics, race, and gender. As Private Alicia Monroe watched the humiliation unfold, something in the old woman's dignified silence spoke of battles fought long before this one. Battles that were about to resurface after 45 years of enforced shadows. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The fluorescent lights of the base commissary hummed overhead as Evelyn Rhodes made her way through the sliding doors. At 73, she moved with deliberate care, each step measured but purposeful. Her uniform, worn but meticulously pressed, hung a little loose on her frame. Time had taken some of her physical presence, but not an ounce of her dignity. Conversations dimmed as she passed by. Young soldiers, some not even born when she'd served, exchanged glances and whispers. A few chuckles rippled through the aisle as she examined a display of fresh fruit, her weathered hand selecting an apple with careful precision. "Can I help you find something, ma'am?" The question came from a young cashier, her tone hovering between politeness and confusion. "Just picking up a few things," Evelyn replied, her voice soft but clear. "Been a while since I've been on base." A group of officers stood near the checkout, and one, a lieutenant with a freshly pressed uniform and a demeanor that suggested he considered himself above his current surroundings, took notice of Evelyn. His name tag read Langston, and his eyes narrowed as they fixed on her faded uniform jacket. "Excuse me," he called out, loud enough for nearby shoppers to turn. "Ma'am, that's quite the getup you're wearing." Evelyn turned slowly, her expression neutral. "Pardon me?" Lieutenant Langston approached, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "That thrift store cosplay you've got on, you know, wearing a uniform you didn't earn is actually against the law, right?" The commissary grew quiet. Evelyn stood perfectly still, her back straight despite the years that had bent so many others her age. "I earned this uniform, Lieutenant," she said simply. Langston let out a short laugh, looking around to make sure others were appreciating his performance. "Right, and I'm the Secretary of Defense." He gestured toward her jacket. "That's at least 30 years old. What are you doing on base anyway? Unless you have actual clearance, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." From the corner of the store, Private Alicia Monroe watched the exchange, her stomach nodding with each of Langston's words. She was new to the base, 3 weeks into her first assignment, and already learning the unspoken hierarchies. Lieutenant Langston was not someone you crossed, especially not as a private. But something about the elderly woman's quiet dignity made Alicia's hands clench into fists. Evelyn didn't raise her voice or show any sign of anger. There was only a fleeting shadow that passed across her eyes, a mixture of sadness and something else, something hard and resolute. "I was just leaving anyway," she said, placing her shopping basket down. "Though this base looks different than it did in '79. Langston rolled his eyes. "Sure it does. Security," he called out to a nearby MP. "We've got someone who needs an escort off the premises." 2 security officers approached, looking uncomfortable but determined to do their jobs. Evelyn nodded to them, straightening her jacket with a practiced motion. "I can find my way out," she said. "Ma'am, we'll need to see some ID first," one of the MPs said, more gently than Langston had spoken. Evelyn reached into her pocket and pulled out an old laminated card. The MP examined it, his eyebrows rising slightly before he handed it back. "I'll walk with you to the gate, ma'am," he said, his tone now respectful. As they walked away, Alicia noticed Langston's satisfied smirk. Something about it made her feel sick. "She what?" Brigadier General Sandival's voice cut through the air of her office like a blade. The young aide standing before her desk shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant Langston had security remove an elderly woman from the commissary, ma'am. She was wearing an old uniform. And did anyone bother to check who she was before humiliating her? Sandival's dark eyes flashed. At 45, she commanded respect not through volume, but through intensity. Every word was precise, every gesture deliberate. I don't believe. So, General, not until the MPs were called. Sandival stood, her own uniform impeccable, rows of ribbons telling a story of service that few could match. I want a full report on my desk in an hour. Name, details, everything. And tell Lieutenant Langston I want to see him immediately. Yes, ma'am. When the aide had gone, Sandival moved to the window of her office, looking out over the training grounds where new recruits were running drills. 23 years in the service had taught her many things, but perhaps the most important was that respect wasn't just given to those with the shiniest bars or the loudest voices. She remembered something her first commander had told her. The quietest soldiers often carry the heaviest packs. Something about this incident felt wrong, deeply wrong, and Ava Sandival had built her career on setting things right. Evelyn's apartment was small but meticulously organized. Plants lined the windowsills, and bookshelves held volumes on history, military strategy, and medicine. She moved to her bedroom closet and pulled down an old shoebox from the top shelf. Sitting on the edge of her bed, she opened it carefully. Inside lay medals in their cases, a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and others, their ribbons still vibrant despite the years. Photographs showed a younger Evelyn, her uniform fitting snugly on a strong frame, standing with groups of soldiers. Men and women with expressions that only those who've seen combat truly understand. At the bottom of the box lay an ID card, older than the one she'd shown the MP. This one had classified stamps across it and a date from 1979. She ran her thumb across the surface, remembering. The memories came in flashes, crawling through mud as bullets cracked overhead, tying tourniquets, on screaming men, carrying radio equipment through jungle so thick it seemed to have a pulse of its own. The field promotions that came because there was no one else left to lead. The medals they pinned on her while whispering that certain details would need to be adjusted in the official record. A knock at her door pulled her from the past. When she opened it, she found a young woman in uniform standing there, nervousness written across her features. Sergeant Major Rhodes? The young woman asked. I'm Private Monroe, Alicia Monroe. I was at the commissary earlier. Evelyn studied her for a moment. You were standing by the cereal aisle, watching. Alicia nodded, shame coloring her cheeks. I wanted to apologize for what happened, for not saying anything. Lieutenant Langston was completely out of line. Come in, Private, Evelyn said, stepping aside. Alicia entered cautiously, taking in the simple apartment with its touches of military precision. I'm sorry I didn't speak up, Alicia continued. I should have said something. And risk your position? For what? An old woman you don't know? Evelyn shook her head. That's not how the military works, and you know it. It's not right, though, Alicia insisted. The Brigadier General was furious when she heard. She wants to apologize personally. I can drive you back to the base if you'd like. Evelyn considered this, then shook her head. No, not yet. She looked at Alicia thoughtfully. Why are you here, really? Alicia hesitated. I saw something in your eyes when Langston was talking, like you'd seen it all before and were just waiting for it to pass, like a storm you knew would blow over. A small smile touched Evelyn's lips. Perceptive. My grandmother had the same look sometimes, Alicia admitted. She grew up in Alabama in the 50s. Evelyn nodded in understanding. If you want to do something useful, Private Monroe, find out who I served with at Firebase Lockjaw. She turned away, indicating the conversation was over. That might tell you more than I can. Master Sergeant Cal Torres had seen his share of odd assignments in 20 years of service, but investigating an elderly woman who'd been kicked out of the commissary wasn't on his bingo card for the week. Anything specific I'm looking for? General? He asked as Sandival handed him a thin folder. Find out who Evelyn Rhodes is, Sandival replied. Something about this doesn't add up. The MP who escorted her out said her ID was old but legitimate. Class 3 clearance from the 70s. Torres raised an eyebrow. That's higher than most officers had back then. Exactly, Sandoval nodded. And there's something else. Her name sounds familiar, but I can't place it. Torres opened the folder, which contained only a photocopy of Evelyn's ID and a brief report from the MP. I'll see what I can dig up, he promised. Later that evening, as Sandoval was preparing to leave her office, Torres knocked on her door. You're going to want to see this, he said, placing a yellowed photograph on her desk. Sandoval picked it up. It showed a unit of soldiers standing before a helicopter. Several faces were blanked out, standard procedure for classified operations, but one face remained clear, a young black woman with fierce eyes and a sergeant's stripes. Evelyn Rhodes, Torres confirmed. According to the records I could access, she was MIA, presumed dead in 1980, but that's not all. He hesitated. The unit designation on this photo, it's been redacted, and half the mission files from that period are sealed with clearance levels I don't have. Sandoval stared at the photograph, a memory stirring. Her first commander, Colonel Williams, had kept a similar photo. He'd never spoken about it, but sometimes she'd catch him looking at it with an expression she couldn't read. Keep digging, she told Torres. Whatever happened, we owe her the respect of knowing the truth. Cal Torres sat in the base archives, surrounded by dusty files and the soft hum of ancient fluorescent lights. 3 hours of searching military databases had yielded almost nothing on Evelyn Rhodes. It was as if someone had systematically erased her, except for that one classification. MIA presumed dead, 1980. His phone buzzed with a text from Private Monroe. Found something. Firebase Lockjaw, 1979, special unit. Torres typed back, send, everything. Minutes later, his inbox pinged with scanned documents, all heavily redacted but containing fragments that formed a disturbing picture. Firebase Lockjaw had been a forward operating base near the Vietnam-Cambodia border. Despite the official end of U.S. combat operations years earlier, certain units had remained engaged in classified missions, and Evelyn Rhodes had been there, leading one of them. The jungle closed in around them, thick and unforgiving. Gunfire erupted from the tree line and soldiers scattered for cover. Through the chaos, Sergeant Evelyn Rhodes moved with purpose, barking orders that cut through the panic. Jackson, get that radio working. Miller, cover the eastern approach. Thompson, help me with the wounded. A mortar round exploded nearby, sending dirt and shrapnel flying. Evelyn didn't flinch. She grabbed a young private with a leg wound and dragged him behind a fallen tree. Extraction is compromised, the radio operator shouted. They can't get choppers in with this fire. Evelyn assessed the situation. 12 men, 5 wounded, hostile forces closing in, and no immediate evacuation. The captain was down, the lieutenant, frozen with indecision. We move east through the ravine, she decided, taking command without hesitation. Make stretchers for the wounded. We've got 3 miles to the secondary extraction point. Sergeant, we'll never make it, someone protested. Evelyn checked her weapon and fixed the soldier with a stare that silenced further objections. We all make it, or none of us do. Now move out. In the present, Alicia Monroe stared at a small, metal tag she'd found attached to a faded unit history book in the base library. It bore an emblem she'd never seen before, a winged sword with the words, Ranger Recovery, beneath it. Excuse me, she asked the librarian. Do you know what unit this belonged to? The elderly librarian adjusted her glasses and examined the tag. Oh my, where did you find this? It was bookmarking a page about Firebase operations. This was a specialized rescue unit, the librarian explained, decommissioned decades ago. Top secret classification at the time. Alicia felt a chill run through her. Would there be records of who served in it? The librarian shook her head. Most of those records were sealed. The unit operated in, let's say, gray areas of international law. They went places officially we weren't supposed to be. Alicia thought of Evelyn's tired eyes and quiet dignity. What had she been part of? What had she seen? Brigadier General Sandoval stood in the base, commander's office, phone pressed to her ear. Yes, sir. I understand the sensitivity, but if she's alive and was part of that unit, doesn't she deserve... She paused, listening. Yes, sir. I'll handle it personally. She hung up and turned to Torres. We're bringing Evelyn Rhodes back to the base, this time with the respect she deserves. What did you find out? Torres asked. Sandoval's expression was grave. Enough to know we made a terrible mistake. The following day, a military vehicle pulled up outside Evelyn's apartment building. Private Monroe stepped out, followed by Master Sergeant Torres. Ms. Rhodes, Torres said when Evelyn answered her door. Brigadier General Sandoval requests your presence at the base, with all due respect and apologies for your previous treatment. Evelyn regarded them silently for a long moment. Let me get my jacket. The drive to the base was quiet. Evelyn stared out the window, occasionally nodding as if confirming something to herself. When they arrived, a small reception waited. Sandival herself stood at the entrance to headquarters. As Evelyn approached, Lieutenant Langston emerged from a nearby building. His face registered shock, then annoyance. General, is this really necessary? We have protocols. Lieutenant, Sandoval's voice cracked like a whip. You will show respect to our guest or remove yourself from my sight. Langston's face reddened, but before he could respond, Sandival approached Evelyn and saluted her formally. Sergeant Major Rhodes, thank you for accepting my invitation. Evelyn returned the salute with practiced precision. General, Langston couldn't contain himself. Sergeant Major. With all due respect, General, this woman hasn't served in decades, if ever. That uniform is regulation issue from 1979? Sandival cut him off. She stepped closer to Evelyn, examining the faded patch on her shoulder. What I'm curious about is why your jacket has a Ranger recovery patch that no one alive is supposed to have. A hush fell over the assembled personnel. Evelyn's expression remained impassive, but something flashed in her eyes, a mixture of pain and pride. Because most of them died, she said simply. The silence deepened. Alicia, standing nearby, felt goosebumps rise on her arms. Sandoval nodded slowly. I think we have a lot to discuss, Sergeant Major. Would you join me in my office? As they walked away, Langston stood frozen, his certainty visibly shaken. Alicia found herself assigned to clerical duty that afternoon, filing after-action reports from training exercises. The work was mind-numbing, but it gave her time to think about Evelyn Rhodes and what little she'd discovered. A female officer approached her desk. Private Monroe. Alicia jumped to attention. Yes, ma'am. At ease. I heard you've been asking questions about the Ranger Recovery Unit. Alicia hesitated. Just curious about our history, ma'am. The officer studied her. Curiosity can be dangerous in the military, especially about classified matters. Is it classified to acknowledge the service of those who came before us? Alicia asked, immediately regretting her boldness. To her surprise, the officer smiled slightly. You sound like me at your age. It got me in trouble too. She placed a folder on Alicia's desk. This needs to be filed in the historical archives. While you're there, you might find Section R7 interesting. Just don't mention who pointed you. There. After the officer left, Alicia hurried to the archives. Section R7 contained personnel records from specialized units of the Vietnam era. Most files were thin with heavy redactions, but one name jumped out. Rhodes, E. Status: MIA presumed dead, 1980. Operation Iron Veil. Alicia's hands trembled as she opened the file. Inside was a single page with a mission designation and a note. Last surviving member of primary team. Extraction successful but with significant casualties. Subject recommended for Medal of Honor by Field Commander. Recommendation denied by DoD Oversight Committee. Everything else had been redacted. That evening, Alicia found Evelyn sitting alone in the base coffee shop, stirring a cup she hadn't drunk from. May I join you? Alicia asked. Evelyn gestured to the empty chair. How are you holding up? Alicia ventured. I've had worse days, Evelyn replied, though not many where I've been both insulted and saluted within hours. I found your file, Alicia admitted. Or what's left of it, Operation Iron Veil. Evelyn's hand stilled. You shouldn't know that name. Why does it say you're dead when you're sitting right here? Evelyn looked out the window at the darkening sky. Sometimes it's easier for certain people to be dead on paper than to explain why they did what they did. She turned back to Alicia. You're having doubts about your place here, aren't you? The question caught Alicia off guard. How did you know? I recognized the look. I had it myself once. Evelyn's voice softened. Being first, being black, being a woman, any one of those is hard enough in a system that wasn't built for you. Being all three? She shook her head. The world doesn't want you to survive, let alone succeed. Then why did you do it? Because someone had to. And because once you start something that matters, walking away means it might never get finished. Evelyn stood up. It's getting late. Thank you for the company, Private. Alicia watched her walk away, back straight despite her years, moving with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced far worse than disapproval and lived to tell the tale. In his family's mansion across town, Lieutenant Derek Langston paced his father's study. Retired General William Langston sat behind his desk, expression unreadable. You're telling me you publicly humiliated Evelyn Rhodes? The elder Langston asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I didn't know who she was. How could I? She's wearing a 30-year-old uniform and hasn't been active duty since before I was born, Derek defended himself. Did you bother to ask? His father stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. Did you even look at her before deciding she didn't belong? What does it matter to you? Derek challenged. She's just some— Watch your next words very carefully, son, the general interrupted. He walked to a bookshelf and removed a dusty frame from behind several books. He placed it on the desk, facing Derek. It was a photograph of a much younger Evelyn Rhodes, kneeling beside a wounded soldier, William Langston himself, decades younger. Scrawled across the bottom in faded ink were the words, "Saved my life." Derek stared at the photo, then at his father. Why do you have her picture? The general sat down heavily. Because without her, you wouldn't exist. And it's time you heard exactly what happened in Cambodia in 1979. Late that night, Master Sergeant Torres sat in his office, reviewing everything he'd pieced together about Evelyn Rhodes. The redacted mission report on his desk contained a shocking revelation. She was listed as the last surviving member of Operation Iron Veil, a mission so dangerous and politically sensitive that it had been erased from official military history. Torres rubbed his tired eyes. Whatever Evelyn Rhodes had done, someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one knew about it. But now, decades later, the truth was beginning to surface, and he couldn't shake the feeling that some people would still prefer it stayed buried. The morning light filtered through heavy curtains in the Langston family study. Derek stood by the window, his father's revelation from the previous night still echoing in his mind. You haven't said a word since I told you, General William Langston observed, watching his son from his wheelchair. Age and injury had confined him to it, but nothing had diminished the command in his voice. What am I supposed to say? Derek finally replied, turning to face his father. That the woman I publicly humiliated saved your life during some secret operation that doesn't officially exist, that everything I thought I knew about our family history was incomplete. The elder Langston wheeled himself to his desk and unlocked a drawer. Sit down, Derek. There's more you need to understand. Derek reluctantly took a seat as his father pulled out a weathered leather journal. Cambodia, 1979, William began, opening the journal to reveal handwritten notes and crude maps. Officially, we were never there. The war was over. America had gone home. His fingers traced the faded ink. But some of us hadn't. Why were you there? Derek asked. Intelligence suggested American POWs were being held at a camp near the border. A rescue operation was authorized. Off the books, deniable. Ranger recovery unit was sent in. And Rhodes was part of it? William's laugh held no humor. Part of it? Son, Evelyn Rhodes was the backbone of that unit. Combat medic who'd earned field promotions through 3 tours. By 79, she was commanding special recovery operations. Derek tried to reconcile this information with the elderly woman he'd mocked at the commissary. What happened? We were compromised, William said, his eyes distant with memory. Ambushed 5 miles from the target. Our commanding officer was killed instantly. I took shrapnel in both legs. Half the unit was dead or wounded within minutes. He turned a page in the journal, revealing a rough sketch of jungle terrain. We were deep in enemy territory, no extraction possible at our position. The remaining officers wanted to abort, leave the wounded behind. His voice hardened. Evelyn refused. She took command, organized the survivors. For 5 days, she led us through hostile territory, carrying the wounded when they couldn't walk, fighting off pursuers. Derek studied his father's face, seeing a vulnerability he'd never witnessed before. The last night we were surrounded. Evelyn created a diversion, ran straight into enemy fire to draw them away from our position. William's hand trembled slightly. She was hit twice but kept moving, gave us the time we needed for extraction. He closed the journal. I wrote her up for the Medal of Honor. Every surviving member of that mission signed their support. But she didn't get it, Derek said, remembering what he'd learned. No, the mission was politically inconvenient. Cambodia was off limits. The Pentagon buried it, classified everything. William's eyes flashed with old anger. They offered her a silver star in a private ceremony instead. She refused it. Derek tried to process everything. If the mission was buried, why does her record say she's dead? Because that's what happens when you speak truth to power in the wrong moment, son. They erase you. Across town, in a small classroom at the base training center, Private Alicia Monroe stood at attention as her instructor berated her. You think you know better than 30 years of military doctrine, Private? Captain Wilson's face was inches from hers, veins standing out on his forehead. No, sir, Alicia replied, staring straight ahead. Then explain to me why you contradicted me in front of the entire class. The other cadets watched in uncomfortable silence. Alicia had challenged the captain's dismissal of unconventional leadership in crisis situations, citing what she'd learned about Evelyn Rhodes. I merely suggested that sometimes leadership emerges from unexpected sources in combat situations. Sir, like Sergeant Major Rhodes during Operation Iron Veil. A hush fell over the room. Captain Wilson's eyes widened. That operation is classified. Where did you hear that name? Alicia maintained her composure. From historical records, sir. I've been researching past combat operations as part of my training. 20 demerits, Private, Wilson snapped. And you've just lost your weekend leave. Report to the archives for inventory duty instead. He turned to the rest of the class. Let this be a lesson in the chain of command. You follow orders, you don't question them. As the class was dismissed, a female lieutenant pulled Alicia aside. That was either very brave or very stupid, Monroe. Maybe both, ma'am. The lieutenant glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. Be careful with names like Iron Veil. Some doors are better left closed. Why? Alicia challenged. Because they might reveal uncomfortable truths? Because they might get you the same treatment Rhodes got, the lieutenant replied quietly before walking away. Evelyn's small apartment had become a sanctuary of sorts for Alicia. After her confrontation with Captain Wilson, she'd found herself knocking on the older woman's door seeking, what? Guidance? Validation? You stood up for me, Evelyn observed as they sat on her small balcony. The evening air was warm, carrying the scent of Evelyn's potted herbs. And lost your weekend pass because of it. It wasn't just about you, Alicia admitted. It was about the principle. They teach us about leadership, then punish us for recognizing it in the wrong people. Evelyn smiled slightly. The wrong people being? You know what I mean. I do. Evelyn handed Alicia a cup of tea. The military doesn't change easily, Private. It's built on tradition and structure. Those things have value. They also have cost, Alicia countered. They erased you from history. Evelyn's expression remained neutral, but her eyes reflected decades of carried weight. History is written by those with the power to write it. Our job is to live it with integrity regardless. For the next hour, Evelyn began teaching Alicia, not about the past, but about survival in the present. How to navigate a system not designed for people like them. When to push and when to yield. How to build allies and recognize enemies. Your instinct to fight every battle will get you nowhere, Evelyn explained. Choose carefully which hills you're willing to die on. Did you choose yours? Alicia asked. Evelyn looked out over the darkening sky. I chose the lives of my men over the comfort of my superiors. I'd make the same choice today. In Washington, D.C., an elderly man with silver hair and a distinguished bearing sat in his home office, a secure phone to his ear. You're certain it's her? He asked, tension evident in his voice. Positive, Senator, replied the voice on the other end. Evelyn Rhodes is very much alive, and Brigadier General Sandoval is digging into Iron Veil. Senator Richard Palmer, once Colonel Palmer of Special Operations Command, pinched the bridge of his nose. After all these years, who else knows? The circle is growing. William Langston's son is involved now, and there's a Private Monroe asking questions. Palmer's jaw tightened. Containment is still the priority. Those records stay sealed. Sir, with respect, perhaps it's time to acknowledge you weren't there for the fallout. Palmer cut him off. The congressional hearings, the international incidents, we barely survived it politically. He sighed. Rhodes made her choice when she went public against orders, and we made ours when we buried her instead of honoring her. The voice replied softly. Palmer had no answer for that. After ending the call, he unlocked a hidden safe behind a painting and removed a thick file labeled Iron Veil, Final Disposition. His hand hovered over it for a long moment before he returned it unopened. Some ghosts were better left undisturbed. The next morning, William Langston's personal aide delivered a sealed envelope to the Department of Defense. It contained a formal letter requesting the correction of Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes's military record, along with sworn testimony about Operation Iron Veil and her actions during it. The letter made its way through various offices, raising eyebrows and concern at each stop. By afternoon, it had reached the desk of the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who immediately placed a call to Senator Palmer. The wheels of bureaucracy began to turn, some pushing for resolution, others for continued silence. That evening, as rain pounded against the windows of her apartment, Evelyn returned from dinner to find her door slightly ajar. She approached cautiously, years of training never fully abandoned. Inside, her home had been searched, methodically and professionally. The box containing her medals and photographs was gone. Drawers had been opened and reclosed. Nothing else appeared to be missing. Evelyn stood in the center of her living room, rain dripping from her coat onto the floor. After a moment, she picked up her phone and dialed. General Sandoval? It's Rhodes, we need to talk. The base chapel stood empty save for an elderly caretaker dusting the pews. Master Sergeant Torres approached, showing his ID. I'm looking for Chaplain Morris, he explained. He served here in the early 80s. The caretaker nodded. Retired 5 years ago. Lives about 20 minutes from here. I need to ask him about a soldier. Evelyn Rhodes. Would he remember her? The caretaker stopped dusting. Evelyn? Of course he'd remember. She sent him letters every Christmas until his retirement. Torres's interest sharpened. Did she attend services here? No, the caretaker said thoughtfully. But after she left, a soldier named Jenkins came to Father Morris, gave him a letter to keep safe. Said if anything happened to him, the letter should find its way to the right people. Jenkins, Torres repeated. From her unit? The caretaker shrugged. Don't know details, but the letter's still here. Where? The old man led Torres to a small storeroom behind the altar. From a locked cabinet, he retrieved a dusty box of papers. After some searching, he pulled out a yellowed envelope sealed with wax. Jenkins died in '82, the caretaker explained. Father Morris never knew what to do with this. Didn't seem right to destroy it. Torres held the envelope carefully. The front bore a simple instruction. In the event of my death, deliver to military, authorities regarding Operation Iron Veil and Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes. I think, Torres said quietly, the right time has finally come. The conference room in Brigadier General Sandoval's headquarters buzzed with tension. At the center of the large table sat Evelyn Rhodes, ramrod straight in her worn uniform, now adorned with her original medals, recovered by military police from a dumpster 3 blocks from her apartment. Across from her sat Lieutenant Derek Langston, unable to meet her eyes. Beside him, Master Sergeant Torres reviewed documents with Private Monroe, who had been assigned as administrative support for what Sandival had termed a formal military inquiry of historical significance. The door opened and Sandival entered, followed by 2 JAG officers and a civilian in an expensive suit. Thank you all for coming, Sandival began, taking her seat. This inquiry has been authorized at the highest levels to investigate the historical record regarding Operation Iron Veil and the subsequent classification of Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes's service. The civilian, introduced as Special Counsel Warren from the Department of Defense, spoke next. I want to be clear that this inquiry is not adversarial. Our goal is to establish facts that have been obscured by time and policy. Evelyn's expression remained impassive, but her fingers tapped once on the table, a small tell that Alicia noticed. Sergeant Major Rhodes, Warren continued, we'd like you to recount, for the record, your role in Operation Iron Veil and the events that followed. Evelyn's voice was steady as she began. In April 1979, I was commanding a specialized recovery unit operating near the Cambodia-Vietnam border. Our mission was to extract American POWs believed to be held at a camp 12 miles inside Cambodian territory. For the next hour, she detailed the ambush, the casualties, the 5-day trek through enemy territory with wounded men, and the final extraction where she'd been wounded, drawing enemy fire away from the evacuation point. We recovered 3 American prisoners, she concluded. 2 survived. The mission was classified as a success, despite our losses. Warren consulted his notes. And afterward? I was treated for my injuries at a field hospital, then transferred to Walter Reed. While recovering, I was informed that the operation would be classified at the highest level due to political sensitivities regarding Cambodia. Were you decorated for your actions? Warren asked. I was recommended for the Medal of Honor by my surviving commanding officer. The recommendation was denied. I was offered a Silver Star in a private ceremony instead. Which you refused, Warren noted. Yes. Why? Evelyn's eyes hardened slightly. Because it came with conditions. I was told the official record would state that the operation occurred within Vietnam, not Cambodia. That certain casualties would be attributed to training accidents, not combat. That the recovered prisoners would be listed as discovered during routine operations. She shook her head. I wouldn't dishonor my dead by accepting those lies. Warren nodded. What happened next? I was given options. Accept the narrative or face consequences. I chose the latter. 3 months later, I was informed that due to my injuries I was being medically discharged. My security clearance was revoked. And within a year, I discovered my status had been changed to MIA, presumed dead. A murmur ran through the room. Derek Langston looked physically ill. Warren was about to continue when the door opened. William Langston wheeled himself in, his aide pushing his chair. General Langston, Sandival acknowledged, surprised. We weren't expecting you. I wasn't invited, the elder Langston replied dryly. But when I heard this inquiry was finally happening, I couldn't stay away. He positioned his wheelchair at the table. I'm here to corroborate everything Sergeant Major Rhodes has said. I was there. I owe her my life, as do 7 other men who came home because of her leadership and courage. Warren looked between Evelyn and William. Your testimony carries significant weight, General Langston. But there are still classified aspects of this operation that complicate matters. The only complication, William said firmly, is that the Army buried the truth to avoid political embarrassment. It's time to correct that injustice. The tension in the room ratcheted higher. Warren was about to respond when Torres cleared his throat. "Sir, if I may," he said, sliding a document across the table. "This might be relevant." Warren examined the paper. "What am I looking at, Master Sergeant?" "A transport manifest from the evacuation. There was another survivor from Sergeant Major Rhodes's unit, Staff Sergeant James Bennett. According to records, he's still alive." Warren looked up sharply. "Where is he now?" "I took the liberty of finding out," Torres replied. "He lives in Phoenix, and he's willing to testify." 2 days later, the inquiry reconvened. This time, a new face was present. Staff Sergeant James Bennett, now in his 70s, sat in a wheelchair at the end of the table. His thin frame and oxygen tank spoke of years of health struggles, but his eyes were alert and focused entirely on Evelyn Rhodes. When he was invited to speak, Bennett's voice was weak but determined. "I've waited 45 years to say this publicly. Evelyn Rhodes is the only reason I'm alive today. The only reason any of us made it out." He described in painful detail how Evelyn had carried him on her back for miles after he'd been shot, through the hip, how she'd fought off an enemy patrol single-handedly when they were discovered, and how she'd refused evacuation until every surviving member of her team was accounted for. "They offered her a silver star as hush money," Bennett concluded bitterly. "And when she refused to lie about what happened, they buried her instead. I tried to speak up then. Nobody wanted to hear it." The room fell silent. Finally, Warren spoke. "Thank you for your testimony, Sergeant Bennett. It aligns with what we've heard from General Langston in our review of the recently declassified portions of the mission report." He turned to Evelyn. "Sergeant Major Rhodes, I have one more question. The opposition at the time cited your disobedience to direct orders as grounds for denying your Medal of Honor recommendation. Would you care to address that?" Evelyn's gaze was steady. "I was ordered to leave wounded men behind when we were compromised. I refused that order. I was ordered to falsify my after-action report. I refused that order too." Her voice remained even. "If disobeying immoral orders disqualifies me from recognition, then I accept that disqualification with pride." Bennett made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. William Langston nodded grimly. The inquiry was about to conclude when the door burst open and Private Monroe entered, breathless. "I apologize for the interruption," she said, "but I've found something you need to see." She placed a worn, folded flag on the table. Hand-stitched into its fabric were names, 23 of them, with dates of service and death. In the center, embroidered with careful precision, was the emblem of the Ranger Recovery Unit. "Where did you find this?" Sandival asked. "It was in Sergeant Major Rhodes's stolen service box," Alicia explained. "The MPs recovered it this morning from a storage locker at the bus station. This was inside a hidden compartment." All eyes turned to Evelyn, whose composure finally cracked. She reached out with trembling fingers to touch the flag. "I made this during recovery," she said softly. "For the ones who didn't come home. For the ones they tried to erase." Alicia stood straight, addressing the room with unexpected authority. "Every name on this flag has been confirmed as a member of Sergeant Major Rhodes's unit. Every date matches classified casualty reports. This isn't just a memento. It's a historical record she preserved when official channels failed." Derek Langston, who had been silent throughout the proceedings, finally spoke. "My father told me what happened to your recommendation, Sergeant Major, how it was buried for political convenience." He swallowed hard. "I represent a generation that never knew your sacrifice. I'm deeply sorry for my disrespect." Evelyn acknowledged him with a slight nod but said nothing. Warren gathered his notes. "This inquiry has gathered sufficient evidence to recommend a full review of Sergeant Major Rhodes's service record and decorations. A formal finding will be issued within 30 days. As the room began to clear, Bennett wheeled himself to Evelyn's side. "They can't give us back the years, Ev." "No," she agreed, "but they can give us the truth. That's all I ever wanted." That evening, Alicia sat in her barracks, completing her training assignments. Her roommate entered, eyes wide. "Have you seen this?" she asked, holding up her phone. On the screen was a news headline. Classified memo leaked. Army covered up black female hero's actions to avoid political scandal. Alicia grabbed the phone. The article detailed Operation Iron Veil and included scanned copies of redacted documents showing how Evelyn's Medal of Honor recommendation had been deliberately suppressed. It named names, including Senator Palmer and others still in positions of power. "How did this get out?" Alicia whispered. Her roommate shrugged. "It's everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, all the major news sites." Alicia's phone buzzed with a message from Torres. "All hell's breaking loose. Sandival's been called to D.C. Immediately. Stay close to Rhodes. This is about to get complicated." As she read the message, Alicia realized that what had begun as a simple act of disrespect in a commissary was now snowballing into something that would shake the military establishment to its core. The story they had tried to erase for decades was finally being told, and the world was listening. The headline blazed across the Washington Post website. Army erased war hero to avoid political fallout. Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes speaks out. Similar headlines dominated every major news outlet, social media platform, and television news broadcast. The leaked memo had ignited a firestorm that spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. Evelyn Rhodes sat in her small living room, television off, curtains drawn. 3 voicemails from CNN, 5 from Fox News, and dozens of other media requests had filled her phone since dawn. She hadn't answered any of them. A knock at her door roused her from thought. When she opened it, Alicia Monroe stood there, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" Alicia asked. "It's crazy out there." "I see that," Evelyn replied, gesturing to the news vans parked along her street. She stepped aside to let Alicia in. "I didn't want this, you know." "The truth coming out? The circus?" Evelyn closed the door and returned to her armchair. "All those years I just wanted recognition for my unit, for the ones who didn't come home. Instead, I'm suddenly the main attraction." Alicia sat across from her. "Master Sergeant Torres said Brigadier General Sandoval has been called to Washington for emergency meetings. The Pentagon is in damage control mode." "Of course they are," Evelyn said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "The same people who buried us then are scrambling to save face now." "People are demanding answers," Alicia told her. "Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, members of Congress, they're all calling for investigations." Evelyn's phone rang again. She glanced at it, then turned it face down. 45 years too late. In a wood-paneled conference room at the Pentagon, Brigadier General Sandoval stood before a table of Joint Chiefs and high-ranking Defense Department officials. The tension in the room was palpable. "What exactly were you thinking, General?" demanded the Army Chief of Staff. "Reopening a classified operation without proper authorization?" "With respect, sir," Sandival replied evenly. "I was correcting a historical injustice within my purview as base commander. The inquiries began when Sergeant Major Rhodes was publicly humiliated on my base. And now we have leaked classified documents all over the national media," countered a silver-haired man at the end of the table. "Do you have any idea of the diplomatic ramifications?" "I do, Senator Palmer," Sandival said, fixing him with a steady gaze. "Almost as significant as the ramifications of erasing a decorated soldier's service to protect political careers." Palmer's face reddened. "Watch yourself, General. You're out of line." "No, sir," Sandival responded, her voice firm but controlled. "For the first time in decades, we're finally getting back in line with our core values: honor, integrity, respect." The Secretary of Defense, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "The situation is what it is. The question before us is how we respond. Half the Joint Chiefs want to bury this deeper. The other half want full disclosure and remediation." He looked around the table. "The President has made it clear. We own this mistake and make it right," Senator Palmer scoffed. "The political fallout will be less damaging than continuing a cover-up that's already exposed," the Secretary cut him off. "We're establishing an independent commission to review all aspects of Operation Iron Veil and Sergeant Major Rhodes's treatment afterward." He turned to Sandival. "You'll be our liaison to Rhodes. Make it clear that we intend to correct the historical record and provide appropriate recognition." As the meeting adjourned, Sandival checked her phone. 7 missed calls from Master Sergeant Torres and a text message. Situation escalating. Protesters at main gate, veterans groups mobilizing. The storm was just beginning. By noon, the main entrance to the base had become a sea of protesters. Veterans in uniform, civilian supporters, and media crews packed the area. Signs reading "Honor SGT Major Rhodes" and "End Military Racism" waved above the crowd. Derek Langston watched from his office window, his expression troubled. His phone buzzed with a notification. A military blog had published an article titled "Let Langston, Poster Child for Military Elitism?" accompanied by surveillance footage from the commissary showing his confrontation with Evelyn. He closed the browser, sick to his stomach. 3 days of soul-searching and conversations with his father had transformed his perspective completely. The arrogant officer who'd mocked an elderly woman now seemed like a stranger to him. His office door opened, and a fellow lieutenant entered. "You see what's happening out there? It's a circus. It's overdue," Derek replied quietly. "Come on, Bet, you can't seriously be siding with all this." The lieutenant gestured toward the window. "They're attacking the whole system because of one old case." Derek stood. "That old case is a decorated combat veteran who saved my father's life. She deserved better then, and she deserves better now." "Since when did you become such a bleeding heart?" the lieutenant scoffed. "Since I realized what real leadership looks like," Derek answered. He grabbed his cap and headed for the door. "And it doesn't look like what I've been doing." Back in her apartment, Evelyn finally relented to Alicia's suggestion that she respond to at least some of the media attention. Alicia had set up a simple system, screening calls and taking notes on who wanted what. "They're not just asking about you," Alicia explained. "They want to know about your whole unit, the mission, the cover-up. This is bigger than one person." Evelyn nodded slowly. That's how it should be. When a CNN reporter called, Alicia put the call on speaker. "Ms. Rhodes is available for a brief statement," she said professionally. "Sergeant Major Rhodes," Evelyn corrected gently. The reporter asked about her feelings regarding the newly exposed documents. "I feel..." Evelyn paused, finding her words carefully. "I feel that truth has a way of surfacing, even when powerful forces try to bury it. This isn't about me. It's about every soldier who served in silence, whose contributions were erased, or minimized because they didn't fit a convenient narrative." "Do you want an apology from the Army?" the reporter pressed. "I don't need apologies," Evelyn replied. "I need acknowledgement. For my unit, for those who died under my command. Their names deserve to be remembered." After the call ended, Alicia looked at Evelyn with admiration. "You handled that perfectly." "I've had decades to think about what I'd say if anyone ever asked," Evelyn said with a small smile, "though I never really believed they would." At the base, Master Sergeant Torres was reviewing security footage from the night Evelyn's apartment had been searched. Something about the break-in had bothered him from the beginning. It was too professional, too targeted. He froze a frame showing a reflection in a window, a partial image of the intruder. With some digital enhancement, he could make out enough features to run through the base personnel database. The match made his blood run cold. Major Edward Collins, aide to Senator Palmer. Torres immediately encrypted the evidence and sent copies to both his personal email and to Brigadier General Sandoval. Whatever was happening went higher than he'd imagined. As he left his office, his phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. "Master Sergeant Torres," a male voice said when he answered. "This is a courtesy call. Drop the Rhodes investigation if you value your career." "Who is this?" Torres demanded. The line went dead. Torres stood, in the empty hallway, the threat echoing in his mind. After a moment's consideration, he dialed Sandoval's number. When it went to voicemail, he left a simple message. "It goes all the way to Palmer, and they're getting nervous." Late that afternoon, Torres received a package from the National Archives, records he'd requested days earlier from a related operation. Inside was a dusty VHS tape labeled Deposition Sergeant J. Martinez, 1979. He quickly arranged for it to be converted to digital format. Hours later, he sat alone in a darkened office, watching the grainy footage. On screen, a young Hispanic soldier, with a bandaged head, addressed the camera. "My name is Sergeant Joseph Martinez, 5th Special Forces Group. I'm recording this testimony about Operation Iron Veil and Sergeant Evelyn Rhodes." His voice was weak but determined. "I want it on record that Sergeant Rhodes is the only reason I came home. When our position was overrun, she carried me through enemy territory for 2 days with a bullet in her own shoulder. She refused evacuation until every surviving member of our team was accounted for." The young soldier's eyes glistened with tears. "They're saying we can't talk about what really happened, that it's classified. But someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to remember what she did for us." Torres leaned back in his chair, the weight of history pressing down on him. The deposition had been shelved, buried like Evelyn herself. But now, decades later, Sergeant Martinez would finally be heard. As evening fell, Evelyn sat on a bench in the cemetery, beside a simple headstone that read, "Angela Williams, Captain, U.S. Army, 1946-1979, beloved daughter and friend." "I never thought they'd remember us, Angie," Evelyn said softly to the grave. "But maybe now they will." She placed a small bouquet of wildflowers at the base of the headstone. Captain Williams had been her commanding officer, mentor, and friend. One of the few who had treated her as an equal when the military was still struggling with the integration of women into combat roles. "They're finally asking questions," Evelyn continued. "All these years later, they want to know what happened." She smiled sadly. "You always said the truth would come out eventually. Just wish you were here to see it." As dusk deepened into night, Evelyn remained at the grave, sharing quiet words with the friend who had believed in her when no one else did, the friend who had died in her arms during the chaotic extraction from Cambodia. It was there, in the growing darkness, that Alicia finally found her. The young private approached quietly, respecting the moment. "Brigadier General Sandoval called," Alicia said when Evelyn acknowledged her presence. "Congress wants you to testify. They're convening a special hearing." Evelyn looked back at the headstone, silent for a long moment. "They ignored me once," she finally said. "Why should I go now?" "Because this time," Alicia replied, "the whole world is watching." The flight to Washington, D.C. was quiet. Evelyn sat between Alicia and Brigadier General Sandoval, watching clouds pass beneath the military transport plane. She had agreed to testify but remained skeptical about the outcome. "The committee has guaranteed full transparency," Sandival assured her. "This isn't just a formality, Sergeant Major. They want to make this right." "Politicians always want something," Evelyn replied. "Usually it's to protect themselves." "Some do," Sandoval conceded, "but others genuinely want justice. Either way, this is your chance to tell your story, unredacted, on the record." When they landed at Andrews Air Force Base, a military escort waited to take them to their hotel. Media crews crowded behind barriers, cameras flashing as Evelyn emerged from the plane. "Are we prepared for this?" Evelyn asked, momentarily overwhelmed by the attention. "As ready as we'll ever be," Sandoval replied. "Just remember, you're not alone this time." The congressional hearing room buzzed with anticipation. Every seat was filled. Lawmakers, military officials, media, and public spectators. C-SPAN cameras broadcast the proceedings live to a national audience. Evelyn entered wearing her full dress uniform, meticulously restored with her original medals and ribbons. She walked slowly but with dignity to the witness table, Alicia and Sandoval flanking her. The committee chairman, Congressman Howard Mitchell, called the session to order. Today, we begin a hearing into the events surrounding Operation Iron Veil and the subsequent treatment of Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes, he announced. This committee seeks to establish the truth of what happened in 1979 and the decisions made afterward regarding Sergeant Major Rhodes's service record. Evelyn was sworn in, her right hand steady as she took the oath. Sergeant Major Rhodes, Congressman. Mitchell began. Would you please tell this committee in your own words what occurred during Operation Iron Veil in April 1979? Evelyn leaned toward the microphone. The room fell completely silent. On April 14, 1979, I was serving as second in command of a specialized recovery unit operating in Southeast Asia, she began, her voice clear and steady. Our mission was to extract American prisoners believed to be held at a camp inside Cambodian territory. For the next 45 minutes, Evelyn recounted the mission in precise detail, the ambush that killed their commanding officer, the decision to proceed despite heavy casualties, the 5-day trek through enemy territory with wounded men, and the final extraction where she'd been wounded drawing enemy fire away from the evacuation point. Her testimony was raw, factual, and devoid of self-aggrandizement. She spoke of her fallen comrades by name, describing their actions and sacrifices. The room remained rapt as she detailed the firefights, the improvised medical procedures performed in the field, and the difficult decisions made under constant threat. We completed our primary objective, she concluded. 3 American prisoners were recovered and returned home. 8 members of my unit didn't come back. 17 more, including myself, were wounded. And after the mission? Congressman, Mitchell prompted. After recovery at Walter Reed, I was informed that due to diplomatic sensitivities, the operation would be heavily classified. My recommendation for the Medal of Honor was denied on technical grounds. I was offered a Silver Star instead, contingent on accepting an altered version of events. Altered how? The official record would state that the operation occurred within Vietnam, not Cambodia. That certain casualties would be attributed to training accidents, not combat. That the recovered prisoners would be listed as discovered during routine operations. Evelyn's eyes hardened. I refused to dishonor my dead with those lies. What happened after you refused? Within 3 months, I was medically discharged despite being cleared for duty. My security clearance was revoked, and by 1980, I discovered my status had been changed to MIA, presumed dead. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The chairman allowed them to subside before continuing. Sergeant Major, the committee has reviewed the newly declassified documents concerning Operation Iron Veil. They confirm your account in every detail. He looked at her with evident respect. What we're trying to understand is why your record was falsified, rather than simply classified. Before Evelyn could answer, Senator Richard Palmer requested recognition from the committee. The chairman nodded, allowing him to speak. Sergeant Major Rhodes, Palmer began, his tone professionally cordial but with an underlying edge. Your service record shows multiple instances of insubordination prior to Operation Iron Veil. Isn't it possible that these disciplinary issues, rather than any conspiracy, led to the denial of your Medal of Honor recommendation? The room tensed. Sandival shifted in her seat, clearly restraining herself from intervening. Evelyn met Palmer's gaze directly. Those marks were written by men I saved, Senator. Men who didn't appreciate being dragged to safety by a black woman who outranked them. Her voice remained calm. If questioning orders that would have left wounded soldiers behind is insubordination, then yes, I was insubordinate. Palmer pressed further. The military operates on a chain of command, Sergeant Major. When that breaks down, Evelyn interrupted, soldiers like me make decisions that save lives. I never disobeyed a lawful order in combat, Senator. I did refuse to lie afterward. Perhaps that's what you're referring to. A few spectators applauded before being silenced by the chairman. Palmer's face tightened, but before he could continue, Brigadier General Sandoval requested permission to present evidence. The committee recognizes Brigadier General Sandoval, the chairman said. Sandoval stood. Mr. Chairman, we've recovered video testimony that bears directly on this matter. She nodded to an aide who set up a screen. The grainy footage of Sergeant Martinez's deposition played for the committee. His emotional testimony about Evelyn's heroism brought a hush over the room. When it concluded, several committee members were visibly moved. This deposition was recorded in 1979, Sandival explained. It was shelved and never included in the official record of Operation Iron Veil. Master Sergeant Torres discovered it in the National Archives last week. Palmer shifted uncomfortably in his seat as multiple committee members turned to look at him. As a senior Defense Department official, at the time, he would have had authority over such records. The questioning continued for hours. Evelyn responded to each inquiry with the same steady clarity, neither embellishing her role nor minimizing the political realities that had led to her erasure from history. During a brief recess, Evelyn sat in a side room with Alicia and Sandival. "You're doing brilliantly," Alicia told her. "Palmer is sweating," Sandival observed. "He knows he's on the wrong side of this now." Evelyn sipped water, conserving her energy. "It's not about Palmer or any individual. It's about a system that found it easier to erase me than to acknowledge me." When the hearing resumed, an unexpected figure entered the chamber, an elderly man in a wheelchair, assisted by an aide. Heads turned as William Langston, dressed in his full ceremonial uniform with general's stars, was positioned near the front row. Congressman Mitchell recognized him with evident surprise. "General Langston, the committee wasn't aware you would be joining us today." "My apologies for the unannounced appearance," Langston replied, his voice carrying despite his age. "But when I learned Sergeant Major Rhodes would be testifying, I felt compelled to be here." "Would you like to make a statement, General?" the chairman offered. "I would, Mr. Chairman, with the committee's permission." As Langston was wheeled to, the witness table, he passed Evelyn. Their eyes met briefly, decades of shared history passing between them in a silent exchange. "General William Langston," he introduced himself for the record. "Retired, U.S. Army Special Forces. In April 1979, I was a major serving under Captain Angela Williams in the unit commanded by Sergeant Evelyn Rhodes during Operation Iron Veil." He proceeded to corroborate every detail of Evelyn's testimony, adding his perspective as one of the wounded soldiers she had refused to abandon. "I personally wrote her recommendation for the Medal of Honor," he stated firmly. "Every surviving member of our unit signed it. The denial came from political appointees, not military leadership." His gaze fixed on Senator Palmer. "Some of those appointees are in this room today." Palmer visibly tensed but remained silent. "I owe my life to Sergeant Major Rhodes," Langston continued, "as do many others. The decision to alter her record was not about national security. It was about political convenience and, yes, racism and sexism that were endemic to the system at that time." His voice cracked slightly. "We failed her then. We shouldn't fail her now." The hearing room erupted in applause. This time, the chairman allowed it to continue for several moments before restoring order. As the session was about to continue, a commotion at the back of the room drew attention. A man in a wheelchair was being helped down the center aisle by two younger men. "Mr. Chairman," he called out, his voice weak but determined. "My name is James Bennett, former Staff Sergeant, U.S. Army Special Forces. I served under Sergeant Rhodes in Cambodia." The chairman consulted briefly with his staff. "The committee recognizes Staff Sergeant Bennett." As Bennett was positioned at the witness table, Evelyn's composure finally broke. Tears glistened in her eyes at the sight of her former comrade, a man she hadn't seen in over 4 decades. "Sergeant Rhodes carried me on her back for miles after I was shot through the hip," Bennett testified, his frail body contrasting with the intensity of his words. "She fought off an enemy patrol single-handedly when they discovered our position. She refused evacuation until every one of us was accounted for." He looked directly at Palmer. "They offered her a silver star as hush money, and when she refused to lie about what happened, they buried her instead. I tried to speak up then." His gaze swept the committee. "Is anyone listening now?" The room fell silent. The weight of his question hung in the air, challenging everyone present. Eventually, Congressman Mitchell spoke. "We're listening, Sergeant Bennett. I believe the whole country is listening now." The testimony continued for another hour. When it finally concluded, Mitchell addressed Evelyn directly. "Sergeant Major Rhodes, on behalf of this committee and, if I may say so, on behalf of a grateful nation, I want to thank you for your service and for your testimony today. We will be making formal recommendations based on what we've heard." He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. Some wrongs can never be fully righted, but acknowledgement and truth are at least a beginning. As the hearing adjourned, reporters scrambled to file their stories. Television commentators spoke urgently into cameras. Social media exploded with clips of the testimony and hashtags demanding justice for Evelyn and her unit. In the hallway, outside, Evelyn found herself surrounded by supporters, veterans, civil rights activists, and ordinary citizens who had been moved by her story. Alicia stayed close, helping to manage the crowd while Sandival coordinated with security. A young black female cadet approached, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said simply, saluting Evelyn. "You made my path possible." "Evelyn," returned the salute. "Make it count," she told the young woman. "That's all any of us can do." Later, as they left the Capitol building, Evelyn paused on the steps, looking out over the National Mall. The Washington Monument stood in the distance, a silent witness to America's ongoing struggle to live up to its ideals. "Was it worth it?" Alicia asked quietly. "Coming here, reliving all of this?" Evelyn considered the question. "Ask me tomorrow," she finally replied. "Today, I'm just tired." But as they descended the steps, surrounded by a nation finally hearing her truth, Evelyn Rhodes walked with the same quiet dignity that had carried her through jungles, battlefields, and decades of silence. Her back straight, her head high, her steps purposeful. The battle for recognition wasn't over. But for the first time in 45 years, victory seemed possible. Arlington National Cemetery was silent save for the rustling of leaves in the gentle summer breeze. The immaculate rows of white headstones stretched across rolling green hills, each marking a life given in service to the nation. On this clear morning, a special ceremony was taking place near Section 60, where many of America's most recent fallen heroes rest. A stage had been erected, draped with the American flag and adorned with the emblems of all military branches. Hundreds of chairs faced the platform, filled with military personnel in dress uniforms, government officials, veterans, and families of the fallen. In the front row sat Evelyn Rhodes, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her uniform perfectly pressed for the occasion. 3 months had passed since her congressional testimony. The independent commission established to review Operation Iron Veil had worked quickly, issuing a comprehensive report that confirmed every detail of Evelyn's account. The president had personally signed an executive order correcting her military record and posthumously honoring the members of her unit who had never received proper recognition. Today was not a day of mourning, though Arlington had seen countless such days. Today was, as Brigadier General Sandoval had termed it, a restoration, a symbolic resurrection of truth long buried. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the President of the United States," announced a military aide. The assembled crowd stood. As the president approached the podium, nodded respectfully to Evelyn and began to speak. "We gather today not just to correct a historical injustice, but to reaffirm our commitment to the values that make our military and our nation strong. Truth, honor, sacrifice. These are not mere words, they are principles that must guide our actions, especially when facing difficult choices." The president's gaze swept across the gathering. 45 years ago, a brave group of American soldiers, led by Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes, embarked on a mission of exceptional danger and importance. They did so knowing they might never return, but believing in their duty to leave no American behind enemy lines. As the president recounted the details of Operation Iron Veil, now officially declassified, Evelyn's mind drifted to the faces of her unit. Young men and women who had trusted her leadership, followed her through hellish conditions, some never making it home. She wondered what they would think of this moment after decades of official silence. "The commission has unanimously recommended that Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes receive the Medal of Honor for her actions during Operation Iron Veil," the president continued. "It is my privilege to approve that recommendation and to present this long-overdue recognition today." Brigadier General Sandoval approached to escort Evelyn to the stage. As she rose, Evelyn noticed Alicia Monroe in her dress uniform, standing at attention, eyes shining with pride. Beside her was Master Sergeant Torres, whose investigative persistence had helped uncover the truth. And, surprisingly, Lieutenant Derek Langston stood nearby, his expression solemn and respectful, a far cry from their first encounter at the commissary. On stage, Evelyn stood straight as the president read the citation detailing her extraordinary heroism. When the moment came for the medal to be placed around her neck, it was General William Langston who wheeled forward to perform the honor, tears streaming unashamedly down his weathered face. "Thank you for bringing me home, Sergeant Major," he whispered as he placed the medal against her chest. Evelyn, who had remained composed throughout the proceedings, felt her own eyes fill at his words. They both knew the weight of what had transpired between them, the life-saving actions in a jungle decades ago, the bond forged in blood and sacrifice, the long silence, and now this final acknowledgement. As Evelyn turned to face the crowd, the thousands in attendance rose in thunderous applause. In the sea of faces, she spotted familiar ones, James Bennett in his wheelchair, other veterans from her era, and dozens of uniformed soldiers she didn't recognize who saluted her with profound respect. When the applause finally subsided, Evelyn stepped to the microphone. She had prepared no speech, believing actions had always spoken louder than words in her life. "This medal," she began, her voice clear and steady, "belongs not just to me, but to every member of the Ranger Recovery Unit who served with honor, especially those who never came home." She paused, collecting herself. Captain Angela Williams, Lieutenant Michael Dawson, Sergeant Joseph Harris. One by one, she recited the names of the fallen, each one engraved in her memory. When she finished the list, the cemetery was completely silent. They were Americans of every color and background, united by a commitment to leave no one behind. Their story deserves to be remembered not because it's extraordinary, but because it represents the best of what military service should be. As she stepped back from the podium, a group approached the stage, men and women of varying ages, some bearing striking resemblances to soldiers from her unit. Evelyn realized with a start that these were the children and grandchildren of her fallen comrades. A middle-aged man with kind eyes reached for her hand. "Sergeant Major Rhodes, I'm Michael Dawson, Jr. My father died during the extraction." His voice caught slightly. "All my life, my mother told me he died a hero, even when the official record said it was a training accident. Thank you for keeping his truth alive." One by one, they embraced her, calling her Aunt Evelyn, and thanking her tearfully for honoring their parents' sacrifices. For Evelyn, this moment, this connection to the families of those she had led, meant more than any medal or ceremony. Later, as the formal proceedings concluded, Evelyn found herself surrounded by well-wishers. A representative from West Point approached. "Sergeant Major, the Academy would be honored if you would consider serving as a ceremonial advisor to our leadership program. Your experience and perspective would be invaluable to the next generation of officers." Evelyn considered the offer, briefly before shaking her head. "I appreciate the recognition, but I'm not the right person for that role." She glanced toward Alicia, who was speaking with a group of young cadets. "However, I'd like to recommend Private Monroe for your leadership development program. She represents the future better than I ever could." Across the crowd, Lieutenant Derek Langston approached cautiously, clearly uncertain of his welcome. When he reached Evelyn, he stood at attention and saluted formally. "Sergeant Major Rhodes," he said, his voice steady but humble. "I want to apologize again for my behavior when we first met. I was wrong in every possible way." Evelyn returned his salute. "You've learned something important, Lieutenant. That's what matters now." "I have," he agreed. "I once judged someone by the shine on her jacket, not the stories sewn into it." He hesitated, then added, "My father told me everything you did for him, for all of them. I hope to serve with half your integrity." As the crowd began to disperse, Brigadier General Sandoval joined Evelyn. "The National Military Museum is creating an exhibit in your honor," she informed her. "They've requested your jacket, the unit flag with the names, and any other artifacts you might be willing to share." Evelyn nodded. "They should have them. The story belongs to history now." "Speaking of history," Sandival continued, A senator is introducing legislation next week, the Rhodes Act. It would create new protocols to prevent future erasures of heroism based on race, gender, or political convenience. A small smile crossed Evelyn's face. Angela would have appreciated the irony. She always said the system would only change when it was forced to. As they walked together toward the cemetery gates, Evelyn felt a strange mixture of closure and new beginning. The weight of silence she had carried for decades was lifted, replaced by the responsibility of a legacy now publicly acknowledged. She glanced back at Arlington's endless rows of white stones. Somewhere among them, many of her comrades rested. Today, finally, they had all been brought back from erasure into the light of recognition. In the months that followed, Evelyn returned to her quiet life, tending her garden, reading in her comfortable chair, shopping at the commissary where she was now treated with universal respect. But her solitude was frequently interrupted by visitors, students writing papers on military history, young officers seeking mentorship, veterans wanting to share their own stories of being overlooked. She welcomed them all, recognizing that her story had become something larger than herself, a touchstone for conversations about recognition, justice, and the true meaning of service. When Alicia was accepted into the West Point Leadership Program, she visited Evelyn's apartment with the news. "I wouldn't be here without you," she told Evelyn, her excitement palpable. "You earned it yourself," Evelyn replied. "I just opened a door that should never have been closed." Alicia shook her head. "It's more than that. You showed me what leadership really means. Standing for what's right even when it costs you everything." Evelyn smiled at the young woman who had become like family to her. "Just remember, when you're in a position to open doors for others, do it. That's how change becomes permanent." Later that evening, alone again, Evelyn opened her closet and ran her fingers over the empty hanger where her uniform jacket had hung for decades. It now resided in the National Military Museum, alongside the flag bearing the names of her unit and the newly declassified mission reports. She had kept only one thing for herself, a single photograph of her unit taken before Operation Iron Veil, all of them young and determined, unaware of how history would test them. She placed it on her bedside table, a private reminder of the truth that had finally found its way into the light. 1 year later, the auditorium of the Kennedy Center was filled to capacity. On stage, Private First Class Alicia Monroe, recently promoted after her outstanding performance at West Point, stood before the rapt audience, her uniform crisp, her posture confident. "I titled this talk, 'The Hero They Erased,' because erasure happens in so many ways," she began. "Sometimes it's deliberate, records altered, stories suppressed. Sometimes it's subtle, contributions minimized, voices silenced. But always, it diminishes not just the erased, but all of us who lose their example." The screen behind her displayed a photograph of Evelyn Rhodes receiving the Medal of Honor. Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes led one of the most dangerous rescue missions of the post-Vietnam era. She saved countless lives. She demonstrated extraordinary courage under fire. And for 45 years, her story was buried because it didn't fit a convenient narrative. Alicia's voice grew passionate as she continued. "But this isn't just about one soldier or one mission. It's about who we choose to honor, whose stories we preserve, and what that says about our values as a military and as a nation." In the front row, Evelyn watched quietly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Beside her sat Brigadier General Sandoval, Master Sergeant Torres, and several members of Congress who had championed the Rhodes Act, now signed into law. "When we allow heroism to be erased because of race, gender, or political convenience, we betray our most fundamental principles," Alicia continued. "We tell certain Americans that their service matters less, that their sacrifice is somehow secondary." Her voice broke slightly as she concluded. "Sergeant Major Rhodes once told me, being first, being black, being a woman, any one of those is hard enough in a system that wasn't built for you. Being all three means the world doesn't want you to survive, let alone succeed." Alicia paused, composing herself. But she did survive. She did succeed. And now, her example will help ensure that no future soldiers' contributions are erased from our collective memory. As Alicia finished to a standing ovation, tears glistened in her eyes. Evelyn rose first, applauding proudly for the young woman who had taken up the mantle of truth-telling. At his desk in the Pentagon, Master Sergeant Cal Torres put the finishing touches on the manuscript that had consumed his free time for the past year. Titled, Operation Iron Veil, The Mission They Erased, it chronicled not just the operation itself, but the decades-long cover-up and eventual recognition of Evelyn Rhodes and her unit. His phone rang, his publisher calling about the final edits. "The foreword from General Sandoval just came in," the editor told him. "It's powerful stuff. And the endorsement from the Joint Chiefs makes this required reading for every officer candidate." Torres smiled to himself. When he'd begun investigating a seemingly minor incident at the Commissary, he could never have imagined where it would lead. Now, the book he'd written would become part of the curriculum at West Point, Annapolis, and the Air Force Academy. "Any word from Senator Palmer?" the editor asked. "Still no comment," Torres replied. The senator had resigned shortly after the congressional hearings, citing health concerns. The real story, his role in suppressing Evelyn's record, had eventually emerged through declassified memos. After hanging up, Torres flipped through the photo section of his manuscript. The images told a powerful story. Young Evelyn leading men through jungle terrain, the famous photograph of her carrying a wounded soldier to safety, the congressional hearing where the truth finally emerged, the Medal of Honor ceremony at Arlington. The book would ensure that what happened to Evelyn Rhodes would never be forgotten, and hopefully, never repeated. At a leadership summit in Chicago, Lieutenant Langston stood before an audience of corporate executives and military officers. His topic, redefining leadership beyond rank and privilege. 3 years ago, I was the poster child for everything wrong with military leadership, he began candidly. I had the uniform, the family legacy, the rank, and I thought that was enough. He paced the stage, his manner more humble than anyone who knew him in his earlier days would have believed possible. Then I encountered Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes, a decorated combat veteran who I dismissed because her uniform was worn and she didn't fit my narrow idea of what a hero looked like. Derek shook his head at the memory. It was the most shameful moment of my life, but also the most transformative. He described how learning Rhodes's story had changed his entire concept of leadership. Real leadership isn't about having authority. It's about what you do with it. It's not about receiving recognition. It's about ensuring others get the recognition they deserve. In the years since his confrontation with Evelyn, Derek had become an advocate for military reform, particularly around issues of diversity and recognition. His willingness to speak openly about his own failings had made him an unexpected but effective voice for change. Evelyn Rhodes's story changed my entire idea of leadership, he told the audience. And if we're wise, it will change our institutions as well. The jungle closed in around them, thick and unforgiving. Gunfire erupted from the tree line, and soldiers scattered for cover. Through the chaos, Sergeant Evelyn Rhodes moved with purpose, barking orders that cut through the panic. The grainy footage, enhanced from deteriorating film reels, played on screens across the National Military Museum's new permanent exhibition. Operation Iron Veil, Courage Behind Enemy Lines. Visitors watched in hushed silence as the full story of the mission was revealed in vivid detail. The exhibition included personal effects from members of the unit, the original mission maps, and the flag Evelyn had sewn with all their names. Interactive displays allowed visitors to understand the challenges faced during the rescue operation and the difficult decisions made under fire. Most powerful was the wall of photographs, 23 faces of the men and women who had served in the Ranger Recovery Unit, including those who never returned. Beside each image was a biography, ensuring that visitors would know not just what these soldiers did, but who they were. The final section of the exhibition addressed the cover-up and Evelyn's eventual recognition. Original documents showed how systematically her accomplishments had been erased, alongside news clippings and video from the congressional hearings that finally restored her place in history. As visitors exited, they passed under a quote from Evelyn herself. "We honor the fallen not just by remembering their deaths, but by truthfully recording their lives." In a high school classroom in Detroit, a young black girl named Jasmine stood before her classmates, A poster board presentation displayed behind her. For my history project on unsung American heroes, I chose Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes. She began confidently. In 1979, she led a secret mission behind enemy lines to rescue American prisoners. When she refused to accept a sanitized version of events, the military erased her from official records. The teacher nodded encouragingly as Jasmine continued, describing how Rhodes had carried wounded men through hostile territory and saved numerous lives at risk to her own. Her story remained buried for 45 years, Jasmine explained, until a chance encounter at a military base led to the truth finally coming out. As she concluded her presentation, Jasmine's passion was evident. Sergeant Major Rhodes reminds us that heroism isn't always recognized in its time, but the truth has a way of eventually being heard. Across America, in classrooms and dinner tables, in barracks and boardrooms, Evelyn's story was being told, inspiring a new generation to question who gets remembered and why. In her small apartment, Evelyn watched the evening news report on the Rhodes Act's implementation across military branches. New protocols were ensuring that decorations and recognition would be evaluated on merit alone, with multiple layers of review to prevent political or discriminatory interference. She smiled slightly as she turned off the television. The system was changing, slowly perhaps, but meaningfully. It wouldn't erase the past, but it might create a better future. Rising from her chair, Evelyn moved to the wall where she had created a personal gallery of photographs. Her old unit, the Medal of Honor ceremony, Alicia's graduation, the museum exhibition opening. One frame remained empty, a placeholder for something yet to come. The doorbell rang. When she opened it, Alicia stood there in civilian clothes, a small gift bag in her hands. "Just wanted to check in on you," Alicia said, embracing Evelyn warmly. "And to give you this." Inside the bag was a journal bound in soft leather with blank pages waiting to be filled. A note was tucked inside. "For your next mission." Evelyn raised an eyebrow questioningly. "Your memoir," Alicia explained. "There's so much more to your story than what's in the official record or Torres's book. The world needs to hear it in your words." Evelyn ran her fingers over the journal's cover, considering. "I've never been one for writing," she said. "I preferred doing to telling." "Then tell me," Alicia suggested. "I'll write it down. Between your memory and my typing skills, we could have your story preserved exactly as it happened." The idea appealed to Evelyn. Her experiences, not just from Operation Iron Veil, but from a lifetime of breaking barriers, might serve as a roadmap for others facing similar challenges. "We could start next weekend," she agreed. "There are things that should be recorded while I still remember them clearly." Later that evening, after Alicia had gone, Evelyn stood before the wall of photographs, looking at the empty frame. Perhaps someday it would hold the cover of her memoir, another piece of her legacy preserved for future generations. She thought of all the twists her life had taken, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the halls of Congress, from erasure to restoration. None of it had come easily. All of it had exacted a price. But standing here now, seeing how her story had become a catalyst for change, she felt a sense of completion. The following morning, Evelyn rose early and dressed for a walk. The neighborhood was quiet, just beginning to stir with the day's activities. She moved at her own pace, enjoying the simple pleasure of movement, of being present in the world. Her phone rang. Brigadier General Sandoval, calling with news. The E. Rhodes Foundation, established to support overlooked veterans, had secured its first major funding. Sandival had decided to retire from active duty to lead it full-time. "We're going to make a real difference," Sandival told her, "starting with the veterans from your era who never received proper recognition, then expanding to help those who are being overlooked today." "Angela would have loved that," Evelyn replied, thinking of her former commanding officer and friend. "She always said we need to fight for those who come after us, not just for ourselves." After the call ended, Evelyn continued her walk, reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. All those years of silence, of carrying a truth few wanted to hear, had finally given way to recognition that exceeded anything she could have imagined. As she neared her apartment building, a young girl approached, perhaps 10 years old, wearing a t-shirt with "Future Soldier" printed across the front. "Are you Sergeant Major Rhodes?" the girl asked, eyes wide with admiration. "We learned about you in school. My teacher said you're a hero." Evelyn smiled gently. "I'm just someone who did what needed to be done," she replied. "The real heroes were the ones who didn't come home." The girl considered this, then asked, "Can I shake your hand? I want to be brave like you when I grow up." Evelyn extended her hand, weathered by time, but still strong. As the young girl grasped it firmly, Evelyn saw in her eyes the echo of her own determination decades ago, the spark that power and prejudice had tried but failed to extinguish. "They buried my story once," Evelyn thought as she watched the girl run back to her waiting mother. "But stories like mine don't stay buried. We live on in those we inspire." And in that moment, surrounded by the morning light of a new day, Sergeant Major Evelyn Rhodes knew that her greatest mission, to ensure that truth and justice prevailed, even if delayed by decades, had finally been accomplished. What price do we pay as a nation when we erase the heroes who don't fit our preferred narrative? If Evelyn's story moved you, like and subscribe for more untold histories of courage that challenge us to remember better.